Hello guys, it's Ollie Winiberg here from BBC Radio 1, BBC Introducing, BBC Essex and the world of brand new music. I am joined on this kind of fairly odd but now very accepted quarantine television that we call Zoom TV by local legend, in fact national, international legend, Digby Fairweather. Good evening to you, sir.
Hello, Ollie. How are you?
I'm good. What I'm enjoying, the more I'm kind of doing these kind of interviews, I'm picking up on social cues that you don't get in kind of real life. You know, in the world of Zoom television, eye contact seems to be even more important than if you're in a pub with somebody or something, right?
That's absolutely right. And eye contact is something that I use very much as my first judgment about whether I'm going to get on with somebody or not.
Oh, really? So this is potentially a big test for me. Now I don't know what to do with my eyes.
No, you're doing fine.
Oh, stop it.
For years and years, Ollie, I was very shy about eye contact with people. I don't know why. Yeah, definitely. Because it is a very intimate thing in a way, isn't it? I mean, if you actually catch somebody's eyes, that's where the language starts.
Yes.
And having been a very shy man when I was young, I found eye contact extremely difficult, actually.
And did you struggle with shyness when you kind of rose to fame?
Well, it's very kind of you to say I rose to fame. I don't know about that.
Digby, you're on Wikipedia. Of course you're famous. You've ticked the box.
Yeah, I wrote that in for myself. I think, to be honest with you, although I didn't realise it at the time, Ollie, playing jazz when I was young was how can I put it? It was an outlet for a very shy man.
Mm-hmm.
Because although I was socially completely untrained when I was young, I knew that if I played the trumpet, that people would hopefully like it, and I would for a little while be the centre of somebody's attention.
Yes.
And that was my way of kind of getting through life. And it took me a very long time to learn to communicate with people naturally, a very long time indeed.
That's really interesting because you've been on the scene for such a long time, and what I've seen and read about you, you've always come across as a very kind of popular person, and to do that, I suppose you'd need to have, almost magnified social skills. But it's great that you're kind of saying my trumpet was my social skill at those early days.
Oh yeah, I was terribly shy, Ollie. I went to school very late after the war, which is not a good idea. And then when I was 11, my lovely parents, my mum and dad, shipped me off to a beautiful old country house on the Essex marshes.
Right.
So I didn't do any of the usual things that young people do, like join youth clubs or even kind of particularly interact with my pals at school. Every time I could, I got back to the Essex marshes with my trumpet and spent the whole time playing and thinking about jazz. So it took a long time to actually even get used to the idea of having a girlfriend.
Yeah.
It took a long time.
And when it comes to musicians having a girlfriend, they're usually not exactly shy in coming forward, right? So certainly speaking
I don't
volumes.
think I knew what I was in charge of. I mean, later on, I look back at some of the preachers. Oh, yeah, you were quite douchey when you were young, in your T-shirt and your non-expanded waistline, and playing the trumpet. And I'm, whoa, yeah, But that took a long time, and it's taken me 40 years to get used to the idea, which is probably why I didn't get married till I was 67.
Oh, there's a lot of people that could be watching this now thinking, don't blame him.
Well, it depended. I mean, it is very difficult to be a jazz musician and be married, actually. And some of my much better known friends who were much greater jazz musicians than I and also had children, sometimes the children ran into a spot of trouble because of the celebrity of their parents. And being a self-employed jazz musician is pretty much a full-time job.
Yeah.
So it was only, it was only in 2013 that I finally found my wife Gwen, who I first met in 1972 when I was playing in her late husband's jazz band around Essex. And we'd always stayed friends. But after, sadly, he passed away. He was quite a bit older than Gwen, my wife.
Right.
And we lost him in 2012.
Oh, I'm sorry.
In 2011, actually, to be exact, in case anybody's making notes. And we got married in 2013.
Oh, well, congratulations on getting married. Did you play at your own wedding?
No, I didn't. No, absolutely not. I
was going to say, everybody who came probably wanted a free Digby Fairweather gig, and they didn't even get one.
Well, between you and I, we only had 7 guests.
Did you really?
Yeah. I had no idea how to get married. I popped the question to Gwen one night, and she said yes. And I phoned the vicar at 3 o'clock in the morning and said, I want to get married tomorrow. And he called me back and he said, Digby, don't be silly. You have to have the bands read and all that stuff, you know. And it took me, well, we got married 3 weeks later, and I think we did have Gwen's brother and sister-in-law. Yeah. My dear friend, the clarinetist Julian Mark Stringle, who was my best man, who's been in my band for 25 years. Yeah. And believe it or not, my lady accountant, Margaret Heather, and her husband, who had been working for me for 30 years. When I said to her, Margaret, I'm getting married, she said, oh, I've got to be there. So she turned up. Yeah. And that was it.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. So you're an Essex boy kind of through and through, really. Totally. What has been kind of some of the biggest changes that you've witnessed in music, not only you know, on a local scale, but a national and international scale, you know, with introductions of streaming websites and, you know, ticket sales kind of going up because people are not really buying physical releases anymore?
Oh, that's absolutely right. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when the Beatles arrived, believe it or not. Just.
Oh, wow.
Because I'm
that's
a baby
great.
And I can tell you that was the first great musical revolution of the 20th century after jazz. It literally cleared the floor in a year, including jazz, by the way. And that was something that, when it happened at the time, and I was already playing jazz, I thought we've had it, actually, because these 4 men came down from Liverpool with their gorgeous haircuts and their tremendous songs. And not only did they sweep the board clean, but they got rid of a lot of other art forms that actually went straight into the sidelines. And that included me. But the funny thing is that as time went on, I think I still like pop music a lot, but I don't think it quite has the phenomenal impact that the Beatles had, and maybe the Beach Boys. Of course, the sources for it have also, as I think you hinted, Ollie, they've enormously enlarged. I mean, you can listen to pop music anywhere now on your mobile phone. You can listen on the internet anywhere, you know. So the sources are greatly enlarged. And, you know, I think that's one of the great things, because in the old days, you had Radio 1 and Radio 2, basically. When they went over to turntable policy in the 80s, it was all pop from then on. Yeah. But nowadays, there's a lot of intelligent young people around. And I think because they've got YouTube and they've got things like this, you know, and also lots of other different listening sources, they're a lot more able to make their own choices. And I think that's saved old codgers like me, you know, because some of them who come into the Jazz Centre UK, which I started 5 years ago in Southend, they're only 17 or 18. And they say, wow, what is this music? And I said, well, it's jazz. Do you like it? And they say, well, actually, we do. And they pop off and they look up Louis Armstrong or Charlie Parker or Art Tatum on YouTube. And all of a sudden, and you know another thing, we're talking about the marvelous Leigh Folk Festival. Yes. And one of the things that I was stunned at, actually, but delighted about, was when I got to play there 2 years ago.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that.
Well, yeah. I mean, 25 years ago, you wouldn't have seen Digby Fairweather at a folk music festival. No. I just wonder, Ollie, and you would know more about this than me being a broadcaster, whether or not all the different, shall we say, angles or genres of music, they're gradually kind of interlinking and melding into each other. And in the end, there'll just be one thing, which is music with a capital M.
Well, I you know, part of me really agrees with that. You know, for example, I think that if you're going to describe a genre of music, I think that it's important that the word that's describing the genre is relevant. You know, for example, when you talk about pop music, well, the word pop doesn't actually educate me as to what that sounds like. But when you use the word, for example, rock, if you think of the physical object of a rock, you know, it's heavy, it's sludgy, it's kind of a bit misshapen. That is a great example for rock. Or you know, another good example could be metal. You know, metal it's cleaner than rock, but it's tighter and you can mold it. And I think, you know, if you were to listen to, and I've said this before elsewhere, but if you were to listen to recordings from Zeppelin or Slipknot, you know, Slipknot might be heavier, but it's cleaner, you know? So I think that you're absolutely right. There are more and more subdivisions coming off these bigger islands of music. You know, like, obviously you've got rock, and then you've got progressive rock, and then you've got punk rock, and then pop punk, and it's just kind of never ending.
Grunge.
Yeah, grunge, yeah.
Right.
Exactly. We need to go to a gig together. I feel like we get on quite well. But yeah,
enough, the reverse happened with jazz, because way before you were born and before the Beatles came along, we were very kind of categorized. We either liked, well, bebop, or we liked classic jazz, or traditional jazz, or Chicago style jazz, or post bop, or hard bop, or fusion, or world music. All those categories.
You can't go wrong with fusion, Digby. You cannot go wrong with fusion.
I love it. But the truth is, when rock and roll music came along in a big way and became a real powerful cultural force, most of the people who had sort of rather perversely divided themselves into being a traddie or a bebopper or whatever, all of a sudden they linked arms and said, well, we're all in one same boat together, which is jazz. So yes. I think the barriers maybe have disappeared quite a bit, you know.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, one of the biggest and probably most memorable musical barriers has got to be mods and rockers. You know, you see in Quadrophenia, you know, those, which is one of the best films ever. But yeah, absolutely. You know, you see those musical barriers, and it's nice now that, you know, as you rightly say, in your pocket, you have a library of almost endless music that you can find.
Yeah, it is fantastic. And the opportunity to discover that is terrifically important, I think, for everybody.
Do you think...
in a way... Go on.
No, please, after you.
Well, I was going to say, I think in a way, and I don't want to mention any names here, but I think some of the public media had answers or questions to answer when it came to the 70s and 80s, because the music industry has become such a powerful thing that for a long time they were in a position almost to tell people what they were supposed to be liking. And I think one of the great things about these days is that people can actually say, no, maybe you think that's the thing, but I've picked up on this and I want to explore that and go down a different road. And I think that's incredibly healthy, actually.
It's interesting you say that, because I often, when I'm interviewing people, I'll ask all anybody that I interview the same question, and that is generally, do you think the internet has been good for the music industry? Or, you know, as Lemmy from Motorhead once said, it's the music industry slitting its own throat. And it's interesting that you've fallen, Digby, on the side that you believe that the internet is kind of a positive thing for the music industry and the world of music.
Yeah, I believe that, yeah.
And I wonder if that, Digby, and I say this respectfully, but I wonder if that's because you found your fame and your, you know, you had your success at a time where the internet wasn't a threat to your music. So it was harder for people to perhaps find music like you were playing elsewhere.
Yeah, that's true, I think. I mean, I've been amazed for one thing, because if I was going to categorize myself, I'd probably call myself a swing musician, Dixieland swing. Yeah. And it's amazing, actually, how swing has come back enormously over the last 10 years. I mean, I know there's great dancers. I know a great local dancer called Nicola Wood, who's got a dance troupe that does swing dancing, jump and jive, and all those things. And she didn't discover that by listening to, I'm going to say it, Radio 1 in the 80s. You know, or Radio 2, which was definitely, it was the powers that be saying, this is what is popular, and that's what you've got to listen to. People like Nicola, and a lot of other young people, many of whom come to the Jazz Centre, UK actually, in Southend, are fantastic young dancers and musicians. And they have open minds, and I see them exploring it and loving it in the same way I did when when I was a kid.
Yes, yeah. I definitely get that. I mean, you've mentioned kind of Southend quite a few times. When Digby Fairweather is not on stage performing, where in Essex is kind of your go-to place, whether that's just for a pint or whether that's just for a walk? Like, where do you kind of hang out, and what places around the county are special to you?
What a lovely question. Well, Ollie, you must have
Thank
been,
you.
I don't know whether you ever read my tiny attempt at an autobiography, but you're absolutely right. My home village is Paglesham.
Nice.
And I was brought up for the first 20 years of my adult life, from the time I was 11 to the time I was 30, in short, in a wonderful clapboard 17th century manor house on the marshes of Paglesham called Stanitz. And it was absolutely beautiful, an old house that my dad bought for £1,350 in 1958, a 9-room mansion, which he converted. And that was the place where I heard my first jazz band, because they had a jazz band in Essex, in Paglesham, can you believe? And all the guys in it, who were young teenagers really, had all the latest jazz records. And I formed this phenomenal emotional attachment to Paglesham and all the areas. And nowadays, on a good fine day, Gwen and I walk around all the sea walls, visit the old places.
Oh, that's
and
nice.
It's a change from going up to London and sort of playing at Ronnie's or being in town for commando raids, which is what I call them these days.
That's so cool.
It's lovely. I love it. Love it.
I think Essex has always been a county that's always been very proud of its jazz, which you are one of our jazz trophies. Absolutely. When I was growing up, my brother and I, with our mum, when we were really young, used to go to Churchill's in Southend on a Sunday afternoon to go and see the jazz there. And you had Kenny Baxter, Tony Baxter, their daughter Casey Baxter, which as a child I had a massive crush on, and Alan Clark on drums. And these musicians, they were local, but they were genius. And I think actually, if you were submerged in that culture and you surrounded yourself with these people, Pete Jacobson, Reg Webb, these
Tim
great.
Hutchinson,
Tim Huskinson. Right, seriously, Digby, when are we going for this pint? Because we've got a lot of mutual contacts.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'll allow myself a plug here. When this pandemic is over, I'll be going back to the club I run once a month at the Cricketers. And I'm lucky enough to have Tim Huskinson on piano, Roger Curfey on bass, and my dear friend Alan Clark, who you just mentioned, on drums. We've known each other since
amazing.
1995.
So Alan Clark was my drum teacher. From the ages of from 6 till probably about 17 or 18, he was my drum teacher, and we spent 15 minutes drumming and 45 minutes telling terribly inappropriate jokes to each other.
That sounds like my pal Al. He's a great man. If he's watching this, which I hope he is, how are you doing, Alan? Great man.
Yeah,
and he's a great drummer too. He's been through the car, done it all.
Yeah, he has.
As indeed, Kenny Baxter, you mentioned Kenny and the late Tony. Yes. And you're not going to believe this, but in 1961, oh boy, when I was a young boy, very young boy, Kenny was the first person who used to let me sit in at the Studio Jazz Club down near the old Beecroft Art Gallery. Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible. That's amazing.
Incredible. Well, Kenny was very good when he was young.
I feel like
too.
It really was and I hope that jazz on the scene of this wonderful county never dilutes, because I think it's such a powerful genre of music. And we're talking about Leigh Folk Festival, or this year it's Front Room Festival because of the coronavirus, because of this pandemic. We can't go out and share a couple of pints while we see our favourite local bands, but I think you mentioned earlier about playing the festival a couple of years ago and intertwining not just folk music but jazz and a bit of rock and other things like that. Do you think it's really important now, Digby, bearing in mind the economic state of the music industry, that festivals are being a bit more open-eyed with who they book and all the different genres they choose?
I do, actually. I think it's very important, I mean, apart from anything else, in the old days when the jazz kings were still alive, you know, the ones that are long gone now, you could afford to be more specific. But I think now the barriers are broadening, as we said, and I think that's a good thing, actually. I mean, I don't know what your listening habits are like, Ollie, but I mean, although I'm a jazz trumpeter, and always have been, I listen perfectly happily to the Beach Boys and the Eagles, and soul music. I played in soul bands in the old days. The Eagles, I said, Beach Boys, of course, Beatles, a lot of those guys. And in my opinion, for a great amount of time since the Beatles arrived, there has been some absolutely delightful pop music in all its forms, you know.
Yeah.
I, as a jazz musician, I don't have any problem. I think I kind of turn a little switch, you know, when I listen to David Bowie.
Yes.
I think I'm not going to listen to this like I'd listen to Clifford Brown or Louis Armstrong.
No.
But I can appreciate it on its own terms and love it, actually.
That analogy is absolutely perfect. And I totally and wholeheartedly get what you're saying. Some people, for example, might enjoy listening to Royal Bloods, and the next minute they want to listen to Ludovico Einaudi. You know, you can take yourself. And the great thing with music is it's limitless. You can take yourself down any avenue you want to, dependent on your mood. And you know, I think that's why music is just so powerful. As a hugely successful artist, Digby, and I'm not blowing smoke here. It's true. What would your advice be to any band from, you know, this wonderful county that is watching, that is aspiring musically, whatever their genre? What do you think you would say to them?
Well, I would say follow your heart. Follow your musical convictions, even if they're not fashionable. I think that's very important. And I would say play when and wherever you can, in order to make those choices. If it's any interest, I made a very big choice in 1971, about the time that bebop and fusion and modern jazz were in, to actually go back and re-embrace swing and Dixieland, which was very unfashionable. But I did my best work after that, because I knew that I'd made a conscious artistic decision that I didn't need to go back on. So I knew where I wanted to be. I wasn't actually putting on a hat or playing, I mean, even with due respect, playing for wedding functions or doing the late pops. I knew that whatever I played was going to be what I wanted to play. Yeah. And I don't really think, Ollie, that, I don't know if you agree with me, that you can please anybody unless you give them musical honesty.
That's interesting, because that is definitely a musician's point of view. I think. But
I was speaking as a musician, really, not as a listener. I just meant that I don't think I've been much good at doing a Bowie tribute, even though I like David Bowie.
Yes. Yeah. No, I absolutely get that. 100%. 100%. I think that kind of that wraps it up from my point of view. But thank you so much for joining us, because in a time where local music is at its mercy, you know, local music, it's on its knees at the moment, because perhaps the small amount of money that bands were making, you know, they are not at the moment. And to speak to somebody of your caliber and your experience, the advice that you have given, and no, it's true, the advice that you've given, the stories that you've told, you know, are hopefully going to inspire a few songs out of people, maybe just a couple of lines in a lyric, or maybe just a great little guitar riff. But on behalf of...
if that's the case.
Me too. I think it'd be great. But, you know, you haven't heard the finished product yet, so we don't know if it's a good song or not.
No, sir. Well, we'll have to wait and hope, eh?
We will. Digby, thank you so much for joining us at Front Room Festival.
It's a total pleasure, Ollie. Lovely to speak with you, and the best of luck with your future endeavours.